Okay, it's International Women's Day tomorrow, and I just wanted to showcase a book that I just recently got about Nadezhda Krupskaya, who was a Bolshevik, a communist, a revolutionary, and also Lenin's wife. And they actually met in one Marxist study groups before they started major organizing, as far as I know. So yeah, she was a communist before she met Lenin. He did not convert her, and this is a very interesting phenomenon, by the way, that a lot of the Bolsheviks, both the man and a woman, were communists even before they met, and they met because they were communists. So this is another reason to go on and join a study group, because who knows who you're going to meet there. Maybe a future husband or wife, or maybe a future comrade, which is always something to be desired. But International Women's Day in here, unfortunately, has become a very symbolic kind of a holiday. It actually used to be called as International Labor Women's Day and not just a Women's Day. But gradually, after the Soviet Union's collapse, it just became the holiday of beauty and femininity. And nowadays, many people just think it is kind of like a Mother's Day in the United States, which is a pity, because it used to be a holiday that commemorated something important, actually. Usually, women communists worked on theory just as much as men did. You can find a lot of Krupskaya work, and Alexandra Kollontai is another author who I mentioned, another Bolshevik who I mentioned. Also, Clara Zetkin is very famous, and Rosa Luxemburg as well. So I'm not going to try and pronounce their names in English because I can't. And I think that the Russian pronunciation is a little bit closer to German. So I'm going to just pronounce their names the way that is comfortable to me. But I do highly recommend you read them all if you haven't yet. Obviously, there are some other authors who were not necessarily on the same page with Bolsheviks, such as Goldman. So when people wonder why there are not as many women communists as there are men, well, think about all the labor that women do in addition to just going to work, and think about how Angela Davis and Lenin and multiple authors actually wrote about the double oppression. And I have been wondering personally as to why there aren't as many women communists as there are men. Some people actually try to argue with me and say that there are just as many, and in their student leftist org, there are more women. But, well, yeah, if they're students, they usually would have more opportunities to organize. But here where I am, there are very few women communists. And I kind of know now why, because I have taken a little bit of time to think about this, actually, and I realized just how much women are still suffering under double oppression, and women don't have time. They don't have the capacity to just sit down and think about what's happening, and women are so preoccupied with survival that they don't really have the time to spare to sit and talk, because whether we like it or not, there is a lot of talking involved in not only leftist organizing, but in theory generally. People don't have time to sit down and read theory. People don't have time to sit down and make sense of it because of imperialism, because of the conditions we are pushed into. And in our modern societies, men are encouraged to develop themselves intellectually, and women are told not to worry too much about it, because if you have a man who is intelligent, why do you need to be intelligent? Or worse, many women grow up believing that they're incapable of intellectual labor. They think that they are born inherently less capable than men, and these myths are still perpetuated. And with all the calls to go back to the good old traditional past, women unfortunately are succumbing to this illusion that if you find somebody who's going to help you and take care of you, then you're all set. And this is, of course, is not an exclusively women's problem. It is a human problem. It is a human problem that we're facing, that people get less and less free time. They get more and more utilized time. And if you're not sure what utilized time is, I have a video that is called "Who Does Your Time Belong To?" that talks a little bit more about utilized time. And everybody is oppressed, obviously, but women are more so oppressed. And if you've read Engels' The Origins of Family, Private Property, and the State, you will see how the patriarchal notions coincided with private property notions. So when people started developing a new type of a relationship to private property, the relationship to women also changed, to women and slaves. So women were a kind of property that you now could trade for your own advantage. If you had daughters and if you were a husband, you could decide what to do with this woman, whether she would bear children or not, and what kind of decisions she could make in the household. So obviously during different periods of time, this would change, and women did enjoy some more freedoms in some earlier societies and some indigenous societies as well. But the hegemonic powers, which are Western nowadays, they have had this very static view of women and their roles. But the hegemonic Western way of viewing women as property, as lesser humans, unfortunately persists to this day. And no matter what your personal relationship to women is, you have to admit to yourself that you are not free from ideology and the ideological indoctrination. I had to undo a lot of internalized misogyny over the course of the last 5 years or so, and I still have to continue doing this work. So whether you're a man or a woman or a non-binary person, you have to undo a lot of that damage that's accumulated over thousands of years, actually, because of patriarchy, because of how these societies have evolved. And yes, some indigenous communities did preserve some of the more holistic and wholesome approaches to gender and sex. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the people have not been able to preserve such views, and we have to undo all that damage. And for us to organize successfully, we have to bear all of these different marginalization levels in mind. No, that does not mean that we're going to succumb to identity politics. It just means that we're going to hold all that nuance. We're going to consider all of this information, because when we're better informed, we're able to address these issues more effectively. So don't dismiss Marxist feminism. Don't completely dismiss intersectionality if you're a Marxist, because I think it is a great disservice that you do to yourself and your community. You have to understand how capitalist ideology has seeped into all of us and how our day-to-day decisions may be informed by this ideology. And it's much better to do in a collective. So get together with your study group, with your book club, and talk about women's issues on International Women's Day. Talk about working women's issues more specifically, because most of women's issues nowadays are going to go back to imperialist issues. But do let me know if you've read Krupskaya or Kollontai or Rosa Luxemburg or any of the other women who I mentioned. Let me know what you think. I hope you have a great day today. Happy International Women's Day to all my female comrades. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first. Subscribe to me on all the social medias, even though I don't do much there. And I'll talk to you sometime later.